One of the big news stories that's happened over this past week, lost in the shuffle, the debate over guns, and what happened in Boston was there was an explosion in West Texas that killed more than a dozen people. This was a fertilizer plant where there was an accidental fire, and then a fertilizer tank exploded, leveling nearly 50 homes, causing the roof to collapse in a nursing home. There are at least 15 people that are dead, more than 150 injured. And there's an interesting aspect to this case as far as OSHA investigations and whether or not the plant was adhering to certain safety standards. Joining us to talk about this is Mike Elk. He's a staff writer for In These Times. Mike, first of all, what's the basics in terms of what you found regarding this particular fertilizer plant in Texas?
What's the basic? The basic inspection situation is that basically OSHA has never inspected this plant in my lifetime. The last time they inspected it was 1985. So there's a history of sort of this plant not being inspected. You know, I've covered a lot of workplace accidents, and this looks very similar in some ways to a lot of workplace accidents and deaths that I've covered. For instance, there were no sprinklers, fire alarms, firewalls, or shut-off valves in this entire plant, despite how dangerous the chemicals in it were. This is obviously a big concern. Not only that, but the limited inspections that have occurred at this plant have shown that it has a history of safety issues. For instance, in 2006, in 2004, there was a law in Texas stating that plants like this need to have air ventilators. In 2006, the Texas EPA came along and discovered that the plant had no air ventilation system. So obviously, there were a lot of issues going on here with this plant.
And another issue would be that the plant, obviously, as you mentioned, had not been inspected for a long time, but there were no flammable chemicals that had been listed with regulators, even though, of course, it would take flammable chemicals to cause the kind of explosion that we saw the other night.
Yeah, clearly, the workplace safety is about identifying hazards. And clearly they did not identify the hazard, which is that there could be a huge explosion in this plant.
Tell us, what does this all say about the Obama administration's approach towards OSHA and towards inspecting some of the factories and plants across our nation?
Well, it's not the Obama administration, but this has been symptomatic of OSHA overall. 4,500 people a year are killed in workplace accidents in this country, most of which those deaths are preventable. But the problem is that OSHA is a very weak regulatory agency. It has a budget of only $550 million, which is half as much as we spend, regulating fish and wildlife in this country. So we spend half as much regulating die on the job as we do fish and wildlife. OSHA is so strapped. There's only 2,000 OSHA inspectors for something like 8 million workplaces in the United States.